For 10 days, the country's national police has been operating with less restrictions. They say they've arrested over 6,000 suspected gang members, tracking them in neighborhoods, inside homes, and even hiding underground.
Just before 6 o'clock this morning, SWAT teams surrounded the home of 24-year-old Henry Villatoro Santos, believed to be one of the top 3 leaders of MS-13 on the East Coast.
We're going to destroy the vile criminal cartel MS-13 and many other gangs. But MS-13 is particularly violent. They don't like shooting people because it's too quick, it's too fast. I was reading one of these animals was caught and explaining they like to knife them and cut them and let them die slowly because that way it's more painful and they enjoy watching that much more. These are animals.
Trump is all out to completely destroy the M13. For decades, this notorious Latin American gang has been terrorizing United States citizens. They have been linked to drug trafficking and some of the most brutal murders in the history of America. But with Trump now in power and a new FBI director in place, the US government has launched the most aggressive crackdown on organized crime in US history. Within just weeks, multiple gang bosses have been extradited from Colombia. Top MS-13 leaders have been dragged out of their homes in Virginia and Florida, and hundreds of others have been deported to El Salvador. There, they are now locked in the country's infamous prison, which is worse than death. But what exactly is Trump and his team doing to achieve these insane results within a very short time? Why are a lot of Americans not happy with his methods? And why is Trump planning to imprison Americans in foreign countries? Let's break it all down. When the United States Congress confirmed Kash Patel as FBI director in February 2025, his first order of business wasn't behind a desk. He has been out on the streets ever since, hunting down criminals.
Anyone that wishes to do harm to our way of life and our citizens here or abroad will face the full wrath of the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And if you seek to hide in any corner of this country or any corner of this planet, we will put on the world's largest manhunt and we will find you. And we will decide your end state, not you.
Just a few weeks into the job, Patel oversaw the extradition of 7 high-level cartel leaders from Colombia to the United States.
The FBI just sent a clear message to drug lords. Your time is up. 7 cartel leaders accused of flooding America with thousands of kilos of drugs have been extradited from Colombia.
The drugs they pushed have left a trail of many dead Americans from the East Coast to the Midwest. These men are also connected to gangs like MS-13 and Trenda Aragua, 2 notorious Latin American gangs that President Trump has designated as foreign terrorist organizations. The extradition of these gang members was followed almost immediately by targeted MS-13 takedowns across the US, starting in Virginia, Maryland, and Florida. On March 27, 2025, federal agents raided a house in Woodbridge, Virginia, and their mission was to arrest a 24-year-old man named Henry Josue Villatoro Santos. This was no ordinary suspect. He was an illegal migrant and one of MS-13's top leaders operating in the United States. He had been under surveillance for weeks by a newly assembled FBI-led task force. The team included agents from the FBI, ICE, ATF, Virginia State Police, and Prince William County Police. According to court documents, the agents located Villatoro by tracking his movements to his mother's house, located just 23 miles south of Washington, D.C.
Just before 6 o'clock this morning, SWAT teams surrounded the home of 24-year-old Henry Villatoro Santos, believed to be one of the top 3 leaders of MS-13 on the East Coast.
During the arrest, FBI SWAT agents entered through the front and rear doors of the house. Villatoro was found hiding behind a small wall near the garage and refused to surrender even after the agents gave him verbal commands to do so. They deployed a stun grenade to disorient him before he was then physically pulled out and taken into federal custody. Inside his garage bedroom, agents recovered a cache of weapons. The inventory included a Taurus G2C 9mm handgun, multiple rounds of ammunition, and 2 silencers. Law enforcement sources said Henry was recruited into the gang while he was still in middle school and had risen through the ranks over the past decade. Several gang-related crimes currently under investigation in Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina are believed to have been organized directly through him. His arrest was part of a nationwide gang crackdown launched on March 3, 2025, under the leadership of FBI Director Kash Patel and Attorney General Pam Bondi. Their new strategy is focused on high-level targets, commanders of these criminal organizations, and not just their foot soldiers. Within the first month, 340 arrests were reportedly made. Many of the suspects were illegal migrants with ties to MS-13, Trenda Aragua, and other transnational gangs. In Maryland, another high-ranking MS-13 commander was arrested earlier in February. 27-year-old David Alejandro Orellana Alaman was captured in Hyattsville. He was a documented gang leader in El Salvador. Orellana had been charged in El Salvador in 2016. Unfortunately, he was released and illegally entered the United States, where he remained hidden for years. ICE later confirmed his identity and linked him to multiple MS-13 operations across state lines. Meanwhile, down in Florida, a long-running federal investigation known as Operation Shadow of the Beast has also led to the arrests of 9 MS-13 members. This particular case stands out because these criminals were linked to 4 unsolved murders dating back to 2014 and 2015 in Broward and Palm Beach counties. 6 of the suspects were initially arrested and charged with the murders. Then, on April 4th, 2025, 3 more suspects were captured. Jose Ezequiel Gamez Maravilla was arrested in Lake County, Florida. Hugo ADL Bermudez Martinez was arrested in Minnesota, while Wilbur Rosendo Navarro Escobar was arrested in North Lauderdale. Federal prosecutors confirmed that each of them is facing life in prison if convicted.
Today, we're here to announce the arrest of 3 more MS-13 gang members who were in this country illegally, and they were in Florida, and we will be reviewing them. They've all been arrested for first-degree murder. We will be reviewing them to see if we will seek the death penalty.
These arrests were also executed under the same national initiative led by Trump's DOJ. In the meantime, leaders like Villatoro and Orellana have been taken off the streets, and dozens of firearms and drugs have been recovered. According to DOJ officials, at least 12 murder cases had been reopened and reconnected to MS-13 through new evidence discovered during these raids. These arrests have fractured the MS-13 chain of command at multiple levels, but Trump plans to completely eliminate the entire command structure inside the United States through massive arrests and deportations, like he did during his first tenure. Back then, the gang members were rejected by their home countries, but when Trump withdrew all the foreign aid they were getting from the United States, they made a 180-degree turn.
And the problem we had, as you probably heard, was that the countries wouldn't take them back. Honduras, all of these, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, but they wouldn't take them back. They wouldn't take them back at all. Sir, we give them $750 million. Okay, you let them know that effective immediately, they're no longer getting any foreign aid. They're no longer getting
This time, the affected countries are fully cooperating with the new Trump administration, and that makes it much easier to get these criminals off American soil. While the FBI was taking down MS-13 leaders across the country, President Trump was forming an unusual alliance with El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele. Bukele is the man who calls himself the world's coolest dictator. He's famous for his brutal crackdown on El Salvadorian gangs, especially the MS-13. He built a special prison for them called CCOT, or the Center for Terrorism Confinement. We'll come to the reputation of this prison in a minute. But with Trump's and Bukele's new partnership, El Salvador has accepted to receive illegal immigrants and violent gang members, including top MS-13 operatives from the United States.
First, obviously, he continues with full cooperation on the returning of Salvadorians who find themselves illegally in the United States and welcome them back home. And that's already existing, and that will continue. But second, he has agreed to accept for deportation any illegal alien in the United States who is a criminal from any nationality, be they MS-13 or Trenda Aragua, and house them in his jails.
By March 2025, at least 5 U.S. government flights had already transported deportees, many from Guantanamo Bay and U.S. detention centers, straight to El Salvador's CCOT prison. For starters, This is not your regular prison. As of March 2025, this place is the world's largest and most notorious prison. It was built to hold 40,000 inmates. Each cell holds over 100 men, yet only has 2 sinks and 2 toilets. The inmates are fed on minimal rations. They're held in complete isolation from the outside world. Most of them never see sunlight. Many never speak to lawyers or family again. Upon arrival, prisoners are shackled, heads down, and paraded by armed guards in ski masks. These images are released intentionally to send a message to other gang members that this is where you'd end up as well. Now, here's where things start to get more controversial. The Trump administration is not just stopping at sending migrant gang members to this El Salvadoran prison. They're now planning to send American criminals there too.
Third, he has offered to house in his jails dangerous American criminals in custody in our country, including those of U.S. citizenship and legal residence.
Trump himself was also caught on camera telling President Bukele to start making arrangements for this during his visit to the White House.
Okay, the tape is a little hard to hear, but if you listen closely, you can just make out what the president is saying as he enters the Oval Office today with the president of El Salvador.
Criminals next. Yeah. I said homegrowns are next. The homegrowns built. You got to build about 5 more places. Yeah. I don't know what the laws are. We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country.
So, to put it simply, Trump wants to start sending American criminals to foreign prisons where the U.S. doesn't have any legal jurisdiction. The victims could be held there for the rest of their lives without ever having a day in court or any sort of process to challenge what they were accused or indicted for. The legal authority they're using is a little-known wartime law, the 1798 Alien Enemies Act. It allows the U.S. government to deport people during times of war if they're considered enemy aliens. Trump's DOJ interpreted this to apply to violent gang members, even if they had been living in the U.S. for years. Attorney General Pam Bondi is leading the legal front. Her team is still reviewing denaturalization laws, federal terrorism statutes, and executive emergency powers to see how far the U.S. government can go in stripping gang members of their rights. Bondi is reportedly building a legal case to classify certain gang-affiliated U.S. citizens as enemy combatants. This is a move that could allow the federal government to remove them without standard due process. Her office is also working on a new DOJ framework that would use social media profiles, tattoos, and affiliations as grounds for enhanced scrutiny, push for legislation that gives Trump wartime-like powers against domestic threats during states of emergency. Even though they have not perfected the arrangements on how this is going to play out, something similar is already happening, and the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia proves this. Garcia is a Salvadoran citizen who was deported from the United States on March 15, 2025. The U.S. government claimed his removal was due to an administrative error, but the problem is, Kilmar Abrego Garcia actually entered the United States illegally. He fled El Salvador to escape gang threats and violence targeting his family. However, in 2019, he was granted withholding of removal status. This ruling allowed him to live and work legally in the United States, so he had lived legally in the U.S. with his wife and children since 2019.
The simple reality is that the police said he was an MS-13 gang member. One immigration judge said he was an MS-13 gang member. ICE said he was an MS-13 gang member. Another immigration judge said he was an MS-13 gang member.
He was then deported to El Salvador. Here's his wife leading a protest for his husband's return.
My name is Jennifer. I am Kilmar's wife. He is a father, a son, a brother, and a proud member of CASA and SMART Union member who has dedicated himself to make our family's American dream reality. A dream was shattered on March 12th when he was abducted and disappeared by the United States government in front of our 5-year-old child. Today is 34 days after his disappearance, and I stand before you filled with spirit that refuses to bring down. I will not stop fighting until I see my husband alive.
She had some really nice things to say about her husband, but the irony is that she married this man while he was in jail.
According to court records filed in a Prince George's County, Maryland district court by his wife. In the 2021 filing, written in Vasquez's handwriting, she alleges Abrego Garcia repeatedly beat her, writing, "At this point, I am afraid to be close to him. I have multiple photos, videos of how violent he can be, and all the bruises he has left me." Vasquez alleged that Abrego Garcia punched and scratched her on her eye, leaving her bleeding. In November 2020, "He hit me with his work boot," she wrote. In August 2020, "He hit me in the eye."
If Garcia was brutalizing his own wife that badly, that means he's most probably capable of doing much worse. Anyway, the Supreme Court has unanimously ruled 9-0 that Garcia must be returned, but the Trump administration has refused to bring him back. They maintained that he's an MS-13 gang member, and they claimed that the Supreme Court judgment only required them to remove any legal barriers that could prevent his return to the United States. Now, since he's no longer on U.S. soil, they put his fate and the responsibility of his return in the hands of the El Salvadoran president, Nayib Bukele.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
This case has attracted a lot of backlash from Democrats and civil rights advocates who have continued to condemn the Trump administration for its disregard of constitutional rights and due process.
It's a betrayal of the American experiment. Look, in J.D. Vance and Donald Trump's America, police can knock on an immigrant's door, deport them to a dictatorship without any due process.
Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen even had to travel all the way to El Salvador to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia and possibly facilitate his return process.
The El Salvadoran government arranged for Mr. Abrego Garcia to get out of the prison in order to meet Senator Van Hollen, somewhat bizarrely, in civilian clothes at a hotel in San Salvador.
But it turned out his visit may not be that much of a help, because shortly after their meeting, President Bukele put out this tweet firmly stating that Kilmar will still remain in El Salvador. To understand why Trump and FBI Director Kash Patel are going after MS-13 with such intensity, you have to understand where this gang came from and how US policies helped create it. You see, a lot of people don't know this, but MS-13 didn't start in El Salvador. It started in Los Angeles. In the 1980s, El Salvador was locked in a bloody civil war. Over 880,000 Salvadorans fled the violence and poverty and came to the United States, especially to Southern California. Many ended up in gang-dominated neighborhoods, like Pico Union in Los Angeles. Young, displaced, and living in hostile environments, some of these teens formed a group to protect themselves. That group eventually became known as Mara Salvatrucha 13, or MS-13. They adopted a culture of extreme violence, fueled by loyalty and survival. By the early 1990s, they were already responsible for murders, robberies, and assaults in several states. Then came the policy shift that changed everything. In 1996, the US passed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. It made deportation mandatory for any immigrant with a criminal record. Thousands were flown out of the US and dumped back into El Salvador. This was a country that was still recovering from a bloody war, with no resources to handle organized crime. What happened next was almost predictable. The deported gang members, who were more violent and more experienced, quickly took over poor neighborhoods. By the 2000s, MS-13 had become a transnational organization operating in Central America, Mexico, and across the US. They set up cliques, formed alliances with cartels, and ran extortion and trafficking rackets. Members moved freely between countries. Arresting low-level foot soldiers didn't help because the leadership remained untouched. That cycle continued for years. Then came March 2022, the year MS-13 launched one of the bloodiest attacks in modern Salvadoran history after they murdered 87 people in just 3 days. The victims were mostly innocent civilians with no gang affiliation. It was a public show of power, but it turned out to be their greatest mistake. President Nayib Bukele responded with the type of force that El Salvador had never seen before. he declared a nationwide state of emergency and stripped away citizens' constitutional protections. This gave the Salvadoran law enforcement the power to make arrests without warrants. Even after the arrest, the detainees had no right to legal counsel.
Tonight, El Salvador is under state of emergency after a deadly weekend of gang violence. The National Civil Police reporting 14 people murdered on Friday and 62 the following day, making Saturday one of the deadliest days in 30 years. Salvadorian police reports the notorious MS-13 gang is responsible for the recent killings, immediately making arrests, posting pictures on their social media of them detaining alleged gang members.
Within just a few months, over 75,000 people were arrested. That was about 1 in every 45 adults in the country. Thousands were sent to the infamous CECOT prison, also known as Terrorism Confinement Center. Inside here, there's no parole, no trials, and no hope of release. The strategy is total containment, and it worked. Within a year, El Salvador went from being the murder capital of the world to one of the safest countries in Latin America. President Bukele's approval rating soared, but many human rights groups called what he did a constitutional disaster. But for Bukele, the results spoke louder than the criticism. It is a typical case of the end justifying the means, because now El Salvador is safe and everyone is happy. That might explain why the Trump administration is trying to adapt Bukele's model. Instead of following due process and relying on the United States' rigorous justice system, the Trump team just wants to get rid of the criminals for good by sending them to a foreign prison where they will never have a day in court. Now, do you think Trump's disregard of due process is justified, given the circumstances? Do you think Kilmar Abrego Garcia should be allowed to return to the United States? If yes, what are your reasons? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth videos on cartel activities. Click on any of the cards on your screen to watch more of our videos.